said over and over, oh, we never want kids to just wear their hearing aids at school. They should be wearing them all the time. But Susie's right. That's what we've got to work with. That's our foot in the door, is parents are willing to say, okay, you deal with the hearing aids, right? So we want nothing to do with them, and we're not going to enforce them at home, and we're not going to fuss. But if you want to take that on at school, knock yourselves out. So it's a place to start, right? Having him wear them at school.
So in the case study, it says that no one in the family has ever needed hearing aids. Maybe he thought that only parents with hearing loss have kids with hearing loss.
Maybe.
So we can say, well, 95% of deaf and hard of hearing kids have hearing impairment, so we can say that. And also, you can show them the audiogram and show which speech sounds are missing. And that will give them an idea of why classroom discussions are difficult for the child, because a lot of the speech sounds are in the mid-frequency, so you can also show that.
Yeah, so there's lots of things that we can, as Susie says, as a work in progress, explain to parents. I mean, maybe something like there are hearing loss simulations, right? We've run across some of them. Maybe playing something like that for them would give them a sense of, what the child is missing. So a couple things that I just wanted to follow up on. So that he says the students' language skills are fine in their first language. Now, imagining that none of us speak whatever that child's first language is, what do you think? Think he's right? With that much hearing loss?
Yeah. I think it just goes back to what Tanya said, is like, it's fine at home with one person speaking, and that's it, and that's usually what happens.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that we want to take with a grain of salt, because that happens, I think, sometimes with classroom teachers and school staff, is somehow in their head they imagine this kid has a complete first language in his head with this hearing loss. I don't know why they think that, but I run into it over and over. Somehow, because they'll go, well, I think it's just the ESL, and it's sort of like, what? Yeah, that's because you're imagining that his first language is better than his English, and it probably is a little bit, but that much hearing loss for a kid who's never worn hearing aids, to think that kid's got an intact first language, I would be surprised. But it might be good enough. It's good enough face-to-face language at home that it looks okay. It's not good enough for school, right? And it's not good enough to serve as a solid foundation for a second language, right? So it's not like a hearing kid who has an intact first language and is then learning English. This is a kid, remember Connie, I know for the part-time students you won't get this till next year, but remember how Connie talks about kids who have like an L1 and an L2, and sometimes the deaf and hard of hearing kids have like an L.5, right? They have like half a first language or part of a first language and part of a second language. My guess would be that's what's happening here. Now how would can you sort that out? Yeah, Joanne.
Then you'd have to wear his hearing aids at home, right? To like have his first language at least, at any language, or at school. But he needs to wear them all the time to get any first language, completely.
Yeah.
Any language, whether it's
for sure
L1 or L2.
For sure. Is there a way to assess what his first language is like? Maybe. I'm going to say only if you're lucky, right? If there happens to be someone like a speech language pathologist or somebody else on the hearing staff who happens to speak, because that happens sometimes, right? So there happens to be a speech language pathologist who speaks Cantonese, for example, or there's someone on your staff who speaks Cantonese or they speak Farsi or whatever, and they could help you out and do a bit of an assessment. You might get lucky. It's probably going to be a bit of an unknown. But I think it's fair to say that it's unlikely that this kid has a solid first language, given that much hearing loss, right? So I think that's an excellent point about working with what we've got now, getting the hearing aids on. Now, what's going to be involved in that? In terms of sort of your action plan. Because here's a 7-year-old who's never worn hearing aids before, and whose parents are on the fence, shall we say, about them.
Reinforcement and bribery.
Reinforcement and bribery, yeah. You're gonna have your work cut out for you, possibly, getting hearing aids on these kids. So imagining that the parents go off and buy the hearing aids, and the kid shows up with the hearing aids in his backpack in a box, which is probably what's gonna happen, right? So in terms of your case study, on your action plan, there's gonna be a piece of that that's probably gonna fall on you to do that, right? In conjunction with the classroom teacher and the CERT to say, how do we get this kid, right? How can we reinforce him? How can we set up, make sure we set up routines, and, right, how are we gonna manage this to make sure that we get hearing aids on this kid, right? Because I think you can kind of, when the parents are saying, well, he doesn't need them at home, well, you have no control over that. But if they're saying he doesn't need them at recess, he doesn't need them at lunch, it's kind of like, well, you kind of have some control over that, I would say, right? So just because the parents say he doesn't need to wear them at recess doesn't mean that you, as the classroom teacher, have to go and take them off his ears at recess, right?
And also it says that it's his choice, so if you can convince the child that it's very important and you need to wear them all the time, then he will wear them all the time, even though his parents said, oh, it's okay, you can take them off at home. He'd be like, no, I can hear you better, I'm going to keep them on, right? So
Yeah.
the fact that they left it on him, we could do a lot more with the child, like reinforcement bribery, make sure that he's, wearing them all the time. And so that when he can go home, he can be like, no, I want to wear them all the time.
I think that's the goal,
Yeah.
right? I think that's the way, hopefully, it could happen.
Yeah.
Is the child decides for himself that he's going to wear them, right? In conjunction with organizing some proof or some evidence, right, that it's making a difference. So, so that's kind of where we would be looking at the next part of the case study, right? Is kind of, so we've decided that here are the things that need to be done. So we need to organize this kid getting hearing aids, and we need to organize having him wear them during the school day, right? Working with the parents to try and nudge them along in terms of feeling like the hearing aids are worthwhile and useful. Anything else around the cultural piece? I know it's hard. Think of anything you might be able to do, maybe not necessarily, but might be able to.
Find a connection.
You
a
might.
parent connection in that particular community if you happen to know, or you put feelers out to find out if there are other children from the same background that also are hard of hearing.
Yeah.
And their parents, and possibly approach the other parents and say, would you be willing to help out another family or not? Just sort of feel it all out.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a great idea. And if you're someplace like if you're in someplace like the TDSB, that's not so hard, right? To be able to send out an email to the hearing department to say, I have a new student who is from wherever, new hearing loss diagnosis, parents are kind of struggling with the idea. Does anybody else have a family, have a child on your caseload, from the same country, or a parent who'd be willing to chat with these parents, or could we get the kids together for a play date, and hook up the parents somehow? So that the parents are seeing someone who perhaps also had the same attitude at one point, who maybe also said, no, nobody in my family is ever going to wear hearing aids, and maybe they came around. It might be a good connection.
And I was thinking that would be good for the student as well, because yesterday one of the students that came, she's like, oh, you're from Pakistan. I'm like, yeah. She's like, you're Muslim. I'm like, yeah. She's like, I'm Muslim too. I'm like, oh, that's great. And then she was just saying, oh, I went to Pakistan, and just that connection.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure she's probably never seen as many people that are from Pakistan that she can connect to. So just having that for the student, I think, would be amazing as well. And the fact that they have a hearing loss would
Yeah.
be a more positive motivation to wear the hearing aids.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be harder in a board that has fewer kids, or is more, is not the TDSB, for example. But it's always worth, it's worth trying, right? If you possibly can, and then that's kind of it's a support, it's a role model, sometimes even questions like, have parents say, well, if my child has a head covering, what about their cochlear implant? What about their hearing aid? It's like, it's okay to wear a head covering over that, or does it, just like sometimes practical things like that. That's like, what have you worked out, right? What has been an issue for you as a parent, but also specifically as a parent from the same context, right? As I'm in. Okay, so we've come up with a lot of ideas for our action plan, right? In terms of working with the parent, maybe hooking them up with another family if we can of similar background, working with the hearing aids, getting the child comfortable with the hearing aids, maybe being able to look at the child's first language, maybe not. What about some kind of assessment in English? Yeah, I think as much as you can. It's not going to be an easy task because you are still trying to separate out the ESL from the hearing loss. But I think as much of a language assessment as you can do, that makes sense. Working with, there's always folks in the board who work in ESL, right? Might have some strategies for you, but as much of an assessment as you can do, I think is useful, at least as a baseline, so you know where you are right now. So we've talked about now, if we can get hearing aids on this kid, then being able to have some evidence to show the parents. Right? So I think moving ahead to part 2 of this assignment, part of that might be thinking about, well, what kind of evidence can we gather? How are we going to demonstrate to this child and this family that the hearing aids are making a difference? What are some of the things that we might do? Because report card grades are going to be a ways down the track, right? So how can we do, because we want this kid to be successful with his hearing aids from like day 1, right? So we don't want to say, well, 2 or 3 months from now we'll see when the report card comes out. We want to be able to measure things that demonstrate whether he's benefiting from his hearing aids or not, kind of right away. Right? So just kind of brainstorming, what are some things, thinking ahead of resources or assessment tools, things that you could look at in part 2 of your assignment to measure whether this kid is doing better with his hearing aids or not. I know we haven't really gotten to that. We haven't gotten to formal tools, but just brainstorming.
Would it just be like auditory tests?
Sure.
And skills and like the Ling test and doing activities with that?
Yeah.
So Diana's talked about some, like, we've done mostly the Ling test. We looked at one of the tests last time with the bingo cards. Do you guys remember what it was called? The one with the different pictures.
The ESP, the early speech perception test.
Yeah, it was, yeah. The early
Yeah, when you said bingo cards, I know that test.
So like something like that, that's really,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But that's okay,
Yeah.
right? Because what we're trying to think about is what are ways to show the parents and the kid the kinds of listening difficulties this kid has in the real world, right? Not in a booth, but something like a 6-sound test or some kind of word list, some kind of listening task that you ask the child to do without their hearing aids, and then you get them to put their hearing aids on and you do it again, right? Doing a word list where you say the word to the kid and ask him to write them down or ask him to say them back and you give them 10 words without his hearing aids and 10 words with his hearing aids. It's not rocket science. You're allowed to do it, right? It's not reserved for audiologists to give word lists. And there are word lists that you can use, so you don't have to make up your own. Why not, right? Then you've got a number, right, that you could show to the parents. So I did, without the hearing aids, they got like 4 out of 10 words, and with their hearing aids, they got 10 out of 10 words, right? Something you could do. What else? What other kinds of things?
How old, I forget how old this child is now.
7.
Right? So by then, that's grade 2, and Canadian kids are really good at patterns and organizing items and categorizing items, and a lot of the assessments have subtests where children categorize items, and that can, that's kind of like vocabulary that we take for granted, so maybe the parents would be interested in seeing the limitations of the child's vocabulary, or successes on how well they can group information down, as well as the vocab lists. So like the expressive language assessment and the receptive language assessment, usually the categorizing is a component of that with pictures, and how well they can describe pictures that they see.
Yeah, that's a great that's a great idea. In terms of doing like a language assessment, you want something sort of shorter term than doing, the self 3 times over a month. So you don't want something that's really complicated, but something that's simple, that shows growth in something that you would expect to see growth in, like vocabulary is a perfect one, because you can kind of look at, well, what kind of growth, I mean, again, it's not rocket science, it's not really quantitative, but what kind of growth have we seen in this child's vocabulary over the past year with no hearing? Because you've got a year's worth of the kid not doing very well, right? Something's got to be documented. So here we have a year of not much vocabulary growth, and then you have some sort of easy, simple tasks that measure, well, look at, in the space of a month with his hearing aids, look what we've seen, right? We've seen growth in, and something like vocabulary is perfect because it's what you're going to be focusing on, right? And it's pretty easy to measure, and you should see, like a month with hearing aids with this kid, I'll bet you'd see a lot of vocabulary start to pop up. Yeah, Joanne?
Would giving them like sections of the told with and without hearing aids be appropriate?
It's
Like not fully, but just
Yeah.
Some.
For a couple reasons, you wouldn't, but it's your idea is right. So a standardized test like the told, usually you are only supposed to give it once a year. Okay, so it's not really supposed to be given over and over. Plus, a test like that, if you're one-on-one with this kid and he's right across the table from you, he's probably going to hear pretty well, right? Like he's not going to have a huge amount of trouble. You want, but some kind of assessment of language, or some kind of measure of language before and then afterwards, after say a month or 2 months. And that's going to be tricky, right? Because you can't really use anything standardized, but that's okay because you're not looking for, like, no one's going to, call you on these numbers. But you want to be able to show something. You want to be able to, at the end of the month, have some kind of portfolio of stuff, right, that you could show to the parents that says, look, right, look how much better your child is doing with their hearing aids. Yeah, go.
So this boy, he was lost during classroom discussion, so I was trying to think of how I can imagine him sitting quietly and not participating in the classroom discussion without hearing aid. So I'm trying to see how can you prove that with hearing aid you will participate. I was thinking maybe the teacher can record what he says in the classroom discussion, or I don't know if we can videotape him during classroom discussion, like observe the way he acts. Is he talking in classroom discussion, or is he sitting quietly?
Yeah. You might be able to. might be able to. Or you might even, and again, when we get to the next section on functional hearing assessment, there's a lot of teacher questionnaires that could get at something like that. Or maybe even, to your idea, if you can't videotape, maybe the CERT could sit at the back of the classroom and do some observation, make some notes. Right? Because that's the thing with being a classroom teacher, is you never get the chance to sit back and just watch your kids, because you're always responsible for them, right? And you can learn a lot and observe a lot that a classroom teacher wouldn't necessarily notice if you have the luxury of sitting in the back of the class and just watching, right? So for example, because I do that a lot. So for example, a child, this happened not too long ago, the teacher was doing a math lesson, and he said, gave the lesson and then said, okay guys, I want you guys to turn to page 10 and do questions 1 to 5. And so everybody sat down, they opened their books and they were working away, and the kid with the hearing loss was working away. But when I looked over, because the teacher was wandering around just waiting for the kids to finish, and when I looked over his shoulder, he was on the wrong page. So he was working away he looked like he understood, and he was being compliant, and he was doing something in his math book, but he was on the wrong page. And that's the kind of thing you don't notice if you're the classroom teacher standing at the front, but someone observing at the back would notice that, right? Or would be watching this child and noticing him like just kind of staring around or flipping through his book, or clearly, you can tell by the look on his face he doesn't know what he's supposed to be doing. So having someone like the CERT partner in observing some of this stuff in class would be really helpful. Right? Okay, so let's finish up there. We should do 2 hours for audiology. So let's finish up there. So cochlear implant questions are due. Quiz is coming up. So as I said, I think I will open it a week from Friday, so the part-time students have it over the weekend. So I'll open it sort of for the week, but when you actually log in, you yourself will have 2 hours to do it, okay? So don't stress, because if I give you a week to do it, you'll just stress. Okay, and then other than that, we'll continue to work on some more case studies. But thinking ahead, because everybody did a really good job on part 1 of the assignment, so thinking ahead, part 2 of the assignment is about, now that you have your action plan for this student, finding resources that you would use with this student. So for example, you might have said, well, this student is in high school, and the high school teachers have never had an in-service about hearing loss, right? So only the homeroom teacher has ever had any information. The principal is letting me use 20 minutes from a staff meeting to do a presentation. So that might be your materials that you create, is what, your PowerPoint presentation or something. The idea is for you to tailor your resources as specifically as you can to this student, okay? Which we never have the luxury of doing when you are actually on the job. You're pulling whatever you've got out of the back of your car, right? You don't have a chance to really think as much as you would like about what exact resources would be the best for this student. But you have the chance to this time, right? So if you were doing a presentation for a high school teacher, I'd be looking for you to create a presentation or materials that high school teachers would actually read, or that that is specifically relevant to the high school teachers of that kid, right? So not generic, right? Don't look at the board when you're talking kinds of sheets of handouts, specific things, right? Okay.
Is it the same student as the first
Yes.
part?
Yeah, so you'll continue on with the same case study that you did in the first part. This is just this is the next step of it, okay? All right, good. So I won't see you again for audiology for 2 weeks, right? Next week's family day.